Jesse Brooks is more than just a magician, he's a creator of wonder. I got to speak to him this week. So, Jesse Brooks, what should I call you? Man of wonder? How would I
love it.
Well, why I'm really so interested in interviewing you and speaking to you about all the amazing things that you do is because in many ways I think we live in a world that has not only lost its sense of wonder so much, but also I think people would say we're living in really tough times.
Yeah.
And so people are struggling with the harsh realities of the world. I've spoken to actors, I've spoken to different people, but I think, let's call it men of wonder, because I'm not sure whether I should call you a magician or a dabbler in the magical arts or something like that. But I was fascinated by your approach, at least what I thought is your approach to what you do, and that is that you explore wonder and you create wonder. And it's almost like, I remember once reading a book called The Disenchantment of the World, about how gradually the Age of Enlightenment made us more and more scientific, and bemoaning the loss of enchantment in our world, and how do we ever get that back? And then I thought, Jesse Brooks, he might be able to get that back. Tell me a little bit about wonder, or maybe the re-wondering. Does the world need re-wondering?
It's a really fascinating question. I think it does. I think one of the reasons I'm so fascinated about the concept of wonder, I think, is that it's such a primal human experience. At least it seems to me, but it's one that we don't really have access to very often. Maybe in kind of fleeting moments, but enchantment is not something that seems to come about all that often, even though there's quite a lot to be enchanted about,
Well, I think that might be key to what I'm asking, because
Yeah.
why do we become disenchanted, apart from the disenchantment of the world, as
Yes.
it started explaining everything?
Yeah.
It's like we've got that wonder as a child,
Yes.
and we lose it.
Yes.
Do we lose it because we understand everything, or do we lose it just because we become jaded and tired?
I think that it can maybe be a mix of both. So, in some of the research that I've been doing, it seems very obvious that kind of enlightenment, or at least modernism, or modernity rather, is kind of trained to focus on kind of an objective understanding of a singular phenomena, and to kind of separate it from everything else to be able to understand that has meant that we lose a lot of the kind of entanglement and relationality of things in the world. I think that really one of the things that wonder does is it sort of blows out the conceptual boxes. As we grow up, we essentially are putting a whole lot of things into these little conceptual boxes.
Right.
Wonder seems to blow all of those out, and then you're sort of suspended in this kind of wonder state, which is necessarily very, very entangled, very relational. It sort of restores that sense of which I think is the kind of childlike feeling. It's often people say, when speaking about magic, I felt like a child, or that sort of experience.
I think that's very much an experience of magic.
Yes, and for me, what's interesting is it's not it's not necessarily a kind of a diminutive experience or something, but it's the feeling of I think entanglement, a kind of sensuousness with surroundings, with other humans, things in the sort of available field of phenomena which become kind of charged and vivified. That seems to happen in the kind of wonder experience.
I'm fascinated by that idea, because I was assuming that the disenchantment, the loss of wonder, is because of our growing scientific mind as we get older. But from what you're saying, it's really because everything becomes more and more fragmented. So when we're kids, or maybe in an early era, we saw connections between things, and we seemingly lose that.
Yeah, and then I think also, you know, the way that kind of supposedly inanimate phenomena might impact us, like the way that kids will play, you know, and kind of like readily fantasize, like organizing couch cushions or something, and it becomes a fort, or it becomes something. It's like that aspect of imagination is so kind of real, and filters into so much of lived experience. So when that occurs, and when I think like objects, materials in the world are charged, and there's a feeling that these things are almost alive, you know, at least in the way that a child kind of appreciates a sense of aliveness to things. You know, that's where some of the magic seems to come in, and I think that there's a distantiation from that sense.
So it's kind of allowing adults to have that experience of suspending their disbelief. It seems to me it's almost as if everyone just wants to believe in magic, just even if it's for 5 minutes.
Yeah.
And it's one of the reasons magic succeeds, is because it gives people that. It gives them an alternative world for a short amount of time, in which their imagination is the one they remember having as a child. It kind of gets that back somehow.
Yes, exactly. And I think that people like sort of yearn for that. It seems to nourish something very deep within us. The experience of wonder that kind of expands, I guess, you know, our sense of being in the world, and then our sense of like possibility. It seems to like kind of softly dissolve barriers of thinking. What we thought was possible, but also the kind of ceiling that we might have on our imagination, or possible imaginings of, you know, I guess how the world works, or what we might imagine for ourselves, or ways of being in the world. It seems to like just softly dismantle those things. And then
because I was thinking something you wrote that I read, where you actually called it anarchic.
Right.
Where you said your understanding of wonder, my understanding of wonder is as something anarchic that upends precious conceptual categories, topples binaries, and restores our place within complex relational entanglements. And so on the one hand you're saying it's anarchy in terms of the ordered world, but at the same time restores our place, as if it's more natural to live in this anarchic state, where things are connected, where things don't fit the usual explanations. And perhaps that's part of the yearning that makes people love magic as an art form and entertainment form so much.
Yeah.
But I wonder if it is that deeper sense of maybe we screwed up, maybe we ruined the world, and that's why we want to get the magic back. Yeah,
I mean, possibly. I think people are interested in it for a lot of reasons. The anarchic thing is interesting, because if we understand like that sense of anarchy, essentially is just you know, a dismantling of hierarchy. You know, I think magic is interesting in that way, because it does seem to do that. It seems to essentially dismantle hierarchy in terms of the way that we think about how the world is ordered, but then it can also dismantle social hierarchies. It's like, you know, I've performed for, you know, people who are, you know, fancy CEOs somewhere in the world, and, you know, just random people passing on the street or something, and everybody in between. And it's like at some point what happens is the magic seems to, essentially magic is a kind of great equalizer, and that it sort of seems to dismantle all of the I don't know, machinery that can move people away from each other, and also away from ourselves. and kind of reignite, as I said, sort of like quite a primal experience that people seem to, when they experience it, it's a sense that that it's familiar,
Yeah.
but lost.
And to a large extent nowadays, theatre seems much more focused on holding a mirror up to us and helping us understand the world that we're in, rather than some alternate world where magic is possible.
Right, completely. And I mean, it's a really fascinating thing, because I think obviously there's definitely a place for that, and it's critical, and there's many people doing really good work in that area. For me, what's always been my interest, what continues to be my interest, sort of no matter what I do, especially in theatre, is to try and create the feeling of what I call an elsewhere. So some of my work was looking at the creation of an elsewhere as a kind of alternate space that is charged in the way that kind of ritual spaces would create a charged world, like the plateau, beside the ordinary, but not necessarily things that were like completely magical in the way that we need to be pulled out of our lives, but that something wondrous could happen that could kind of prick our ears and our senses to the rest of the world on coming back. So kind of rites of passage became really, really interesting for me. The fact that people are the structural elements of that people are taken away outside of a familiar space, that there's a crossing of a threshold into an alternate space, which is different, and then a kind of reintegration back into the ordinary world. But then there's almost a superimposition that happens, and that the strangeness of this experience is kind of superimposed onto the life of the person coming back. And I kind of try to take that model and apply it to magic and the experiences that you can have within an illusion, so that we can, even just for a moment, have the feeling of just stepping into an elsewhere, into a kind of charged moment, and then that rises up and then filters back down into the ordinary.
So then, what is I'll put it as crudely as, what is like the long-term benefit of that? How do we gain from having that experience?
Well, I think it's difficult to say. I mean, I think we can sort of say, anecdotally, the benefits of the experience are, I think that it creates a kind of gestalt switch, a perspectival shift that can allow us to become more aware of kind of our own sort of automatisms, the way that we might think ordinarily, and how we might be able to think differently. What I was speaking before about imagining alternate futures, alternate possibilities. I think there's all of those things. But I also just think that, like, the experience of wonder, again, it can allow us to reevaluate our lives, our immediate choices in some way, and it also seems to kind of stretch the mind. Cognitive scientists studying wonder at the moment say that it sort of seems to kind of stretch the mind as those conceptual categories explode and you sort of place them back in, and that's just really a really good practice for kind of a grappling with new information. So I think that it can have kind of and sort of does have kind of cognitive benefits, but then also just benefits of, I think, increasing joy, increasing the capacity for humans to imagine outside of a current reality or situation, which is quite exciting.
That's really interesting. I know you call yourself an experience designer, and so you're talking about the whole experience, which clearly is almost like a ritual, and of course there's a relationship between ritual and theatre and performance, is powerful enough to shift people. What about magic that takes place in very ordinary settings, which has become very popular as well? Be it a street magician or someone in a restaurant, or who, in a very ordinary setting, does something small but utterly extraordinary. Does that still have those kind of benefits of stretching people?
I think so, and I think possibly even more. I've found that it doesn't work really well to create all-encompassing experiences where people kind of, go into a space and feel as if they're somehow separated from the world. It doesn't really work. It's also not really what I'm interested in doing. Almost more what I'm interested in doing is to create something like strangeness that exists within the real world, like a kind of dream or kind of magical realism that exists in the real world. And I think magic that happens in ordinary spaces works really, really well for this. So, in the real world, we kind of have a consensual or an established ordinary that exists. And then a magician might perform something. For me, the best kinds of magic are things that aren't positioned as a performance. So they sort of just seem to unfold in the moment. So, quite often, sometimes I'll be doing I don't know if I have here. No. Sometimes what I would do is, if you take, whoops. There we go.
That just appeared out of your tea.
That's good. But then, you can do this. There we go. So, things that seem to just happen kind of out of ordinary circumstance. And then what I would often do is I'll watch to see if people around notice anything happening.
Right, people who weren't directly
and then,
the target.
And then I like, because very often with magic there's a sense that the magician there's a kind of a hierarchy that happens naturally very often, where there's the magician and there's the audience, right? And it's nice, in my view, to try and disrupt that a little bit, to do some magic but not really to take any credit for it. To either just leave or, to have something appear and then sort of put it down somewhere and then carry on, continue walking down the street or something like that.
Yeah.
And then what happens is, because the magic, the locus of impossibility isn't with the magician anymore, it's like within this strange experience that has happened, then the person seems to, they can own that for themselves a little bit more. It doesn't become about the ego of the magician performing. It becomes about just the strange impossibility that happened. So that's the kind of stuff I'm really interested in.
I don't think anyone really cares to see people saw in half anymore.
Right,
Stuff like that. No. So everyone might not know how that's done, or they probably most of them do by now, but even if they don't, they think, well, I know that's not real.
Completely.
Whereas the things you're talking about, they kind of could be real if I just let it be for 5 minutes. That could be real.
Yes. Yeah, and I think particularly because it's something that happens in an ordinary context, not positioned as a performance.
Yeah.
I think the impossibility of that can linger longer.
Because I found another quote, I don't think you wrote this, but you quoted it. You didn't say who wrote it,
yes.
But you put it in quotation marks. Your primal state of consciousness is neutral and flowing. Then, like jello, it takes on the shape of whatever idea mold is poured into it. That shape congeals and becomes your permanent reality. And then you go and say, the moment of astonishment temporarily breaks that mold and sets intelligence free. Astonishment is the mold of no molds.
Yeah.
And from that, it's almost like, again, it's returning us to our real state. That if we've been molded by culture and by agendas, even if they're just, commercialism or whatever, astonishment reminds us of ourselves. So it's not only about the wonder of the world. As you say, it sets the intelligence free. It reminds us of our own free mind that's under our own control.
Completely, yeah. And that quote is from a really wonderful magician and writer called Paul Harris, who people won't know, but he wrote 3 really wonderful books called The Art of Astonishment, and they were kind of bookended by these sort of lovely philosophical essays with the idea that your neutral state, or at least a kind of innate state, is one of wonder and astonishment, and the magician's illusion is a kind of he says, it's like a little breadcrumb a tool that you hop on and assists to get to that state. So yeah, exactly. Which is I tend to agree with that kind of thing.
Yeah, that's quite
it's a lovely kind of re-rendering of the importance of wonder. Yeah.
This is the thing, because people often think magic is just a trivial entertainment, and it's, from what you're saying, it's anything but. Well, so maybe, it seems as if when it comes to, say, movies, which are the primary form of entertainment in our world, movies with special effects draw a greater attraction, that it includes that magical element, that there's something in there that isn't real. I don't want to go too far down the road of things like superhero movies,
sure,
because they arose in the 40s when the world was at war, and maybe there's still a relationship between why we need superheroes and the crazy world that we find ourselves in.
Yeah.
Although those movies are full of people that can fly, people that can do all sorts of weird and wonderful things. I think in the recent Doctor Strange movies, they did try and cross over a little bit into the states of mind and the states of wonder,
right,
and alternate realities and metaverses and all of those things that are current for us about that. And maybe even the appeal of a metaverse is that same search for wonder and astonishment, and that sense of somehow maybe sensing that I can relate to that's reality, not this.
Yes.
But it is fascinating how people love special effects in movies. It seems to be the
Completely.
same thing. It's magic.
Yeah. I think the special effects thing is it's really interesting for all the reasons that you say, and I think that a lot of these things can contribute to a sense of sort of radical hope, I guess. Like in the same way as magic can allow for imagining past whatever our current circumstances are. If we imagine somebody flying or things like that, it expands our possibilities to some degree. For me, what's interesting, if I think about movies or the metaverse or all of these things, is there seems to be a really big desire to have that feeling, but there seems to be more and more an attempt to find that in a way that doesn't create more entanglement and more relationality, that actually tries to lessen that. So things like the VR and the metaverse, while they are sort of interesting novelties, and I have one of those things as well, but what it essentially does is it kind of cordons you off from like lived experience and live experience. I think magic is really interesting because it's one of the only art forms that needs an audience in order to work. It has to be performed in front of an audience, in order to have the moment of astonishment. So it's necessarily relational, and it kind of I think pulls all those threads together. It sort of resituates us in our entanglements.
So in the end, it's like more real than reality in that sense. It's a better depiction of what reality possibly is.
I think so. I think that's one of the fun points of it. Yeah.
So is there any way that people watching can access your ability or your gift of giving them that sense of astonishment or that sense of wonder?
Sure. The one thing that I do is my children's magic show. So if anybody has any knows any kids or families, or is interested in a kind of family magic show. The show that I've created for that is a kind of fantasy-based show, which tries, at least on a small scale, to do a lot of the things that we've been talking about here, and really kind of nurture and cultivate a real experience of wonder for kids, and is the kind of magic show that I always wanted to see when I was a kid. So yeah, that's available at the moment, and then yeah, feel free to get in touch and I suppose keep up to date on things that I'm doing. There's a couple of interesting things and some plans of theatre shows for adults coming up towards next year.
That's amazing.
So yeah.